What's going on? Boys, today we are talking order shit, cult shit, and this one's going to be a little scrambled. A bunch of different connected mini topics. When something is important but unformed, there isn't a template, I'm bad at creating something from nothing just like that. Instead, I browse lots of unspecific information, try different actions from different sources, review a bunch of images, and then note down whatever bits stick out to me. And I keep reviewing, trying, and noting until something happens. Eventually, the important bits will synthesize into a clear component or whole. I'm sure shadow functions have something to do with it, but at some point, these important pieces come together in exactly the way they need to. And I think it must be shadow functions because this process is NESI concentrated. What appears to be, and probably is, lots of nonsense getting important pieces permanently logged until one day, for no explainable reason, they crystallize. So I read Fight Club to see what the book version was about. And while I think the movie is better generally, some of the ideas get elaborated on a little more in the book. For instance, in the book, they hammer home the idea your death is a certainty. And the sooner you embrace the fact you are going to die, the sooner you are free to live a little. And once you've accepted death, you can die as a space monkey, pushing people forward or bettering other people using your death. And the book fixates on that idea a bit more and takes it in a different direction, but what came to me as I was thinking about this stuff, or wrestling with rather, was not that you are going to die, but because you are going to die, you are already dead. More, you are already forgotten. Not they are going to happen, you are already dead. You are already forgotten. You, right now, no longer exist, and may as well never have existed. And those two ideas stuck out to me. And normally when ideas like those stick out to me, I mark them mentally or physically and file them away, for them to come back later maybe. But instead, after thinking about them for a couple days, I decided to really fixate on them, sit with them. And the idea, or this idea, isn't focused solely on you are dead, you are forgotten. I mean, what do you end up with, or where do you end up, when you sit with foundational or fundamental statements, beliefs from different philosophies for a while? Put nothing else in your head except for them. Or if you are going to explore other ideas, explore them from those statements' perspectives. So I changed my phone background to those two statements. I bought a cheap frame and I printed out a piece of paper and framed it with those two statements on them. So every time I wake up, I see them. After every conversation, or while I'm zoning out watching a video, I make a point of relating whatever that conversation entailed, or whatever's going on in the video, to those ideas, to those statements, applying them to actions or inactions. And it's funny because I am now realizing part of my process with sitting with those ideas is the same arc the narrator follows in the book. At first it's scary, then it's liberating, then it just is, it becomes mundane. And then it went in different directions. If you are already dead, forget actions. Are you a ghost? What does it mean to be someone who is factually already dead and already forgotten, walking around amongst the living? And then approaching it with the stoicism angle as a tool you deploy in trying situations. Well, you're already dead can feel liberating, but the moment you get really tried, get lit up by reality, that you're already dead shit is going to go away. But, unlike with Stoicism, you are, in fact, already dead. You are already forgotten. Now what? Those statements still hold. Does that change anything? Are they something you can cling to again? Are they something to cling to? Now, I stopped doing this after about a little over a week because, interestingly, I started freaking myself out. I don't know why, but every time I started seeing the words, I started having trouble breathing. Not bad trouble breathing, but you know, the whole, like when your adrenaline gets up and you realize you aren't breathing as much as maybe you should be. Feel a general sense of pressure, maybe high blood pressure, like everything is closing in. Just anxious in general, can't relax. So I stopped. Now, I bring these points up for a few reasons. One, if I'm remembering correctly, I started doing this because I wanted to try shaking a philosophy's foundation a little bit. What happens to your spirit, when you perform a particular ritual? Now that is a coded statement we're going to get back to. 2. I'm interested in rituals, but most rituals or ritual practices mean nothing to me. As in, there are people who, for instance, have zero religious or spiritual inclinations who derive something they deem important from spiritual religious practices. That doesn't work for me. Like meditation. Standard-ass meditation has never done anything for me. So many people have pressured me into meditating, and I have relented so many times because maybe I was missing something the last 500 times. So let's try it again with this particular method. Nothing. But then you accidentally create your own rituals that do accomplish something for you. And with these, you realize after 6 months, I didn't even realize I started doing this. What is this? What purpose does this serve for me? Why did I accidentally create it? This exercise was a more conscious effort to produce a ritual. What is something anyone can do that will create an effect? I'm not looking for a particular outcome. I am looking for something substantial and measurable. As in, I am sure if someone else did exactly what I did with these statements, not only would something happen, but it would probably be something else significant to them. So I'm experimenting or trying to hunt up or conjure useful, substantial rituals. Now back to that coded statement for a moment. I have thrown myself back into reading literary criticism. If you want boring but fascinating, rational insanity, read literary criticism, particularly about or focusing on modernism or modern authors, modern literature. Joyce conferences are actual madness. You want to watch a dude who gets paid six figures rant about numbers and equations in James Joyce or Ulysses predicting the future? Go to a Joyce conference. In my opinion, literary criticism throughout the ages is the frontier of human thought. And when I say frontier, I mean actual wilderness frontiers. It's harsh, it's inaccessible, or doesn't try to make itself accessible. Everything is either going to be scary and confusing and overwhelming, or boring and uneventful like a desert. And you have no real reason to go there unless you are trying to find something or trying to get away from something. Now, I bought a book of literary criticism on Aleister Crowley. Just straight up, dry ass, compiled essays, articles, like a reference book you would find at a university library you are not allowed to buy. Which is great for the writers in it, right? Like Don Jolly said, trying to write an article to contribute to progress in the human condition, progressing human thinking, only for your work to get shoved into a massive book the normal public will never read, much less be allowed to read, even if they were allowed to read it. And I've been working my way through it because my attempts to understand most of Crowley's texts as they are have failed. They are incomprehensible to me. So I'm trying to use what I gather from this criticism to build a schema to take another clearer crack at the texts, which in some circles people think you are not supposed to do, but I need some kind of theory if I'm going to navigate this shit and pull out anything I can use. Now, one of the more boring essays, of course, had parts of a useful schema. Now, according to Crowley, magic shit, order shit, cult shit is supposed to be the method of science and the aim of religion. Meaning, you are taking measures that can be somewhat measured more than just blind faith, and faith alone, because faith is not enough. Press F to pay respects, with your goal being more spiritual, but that breaks into a few different things too. Example, ritual as instrument versus ritual as practice. And that's interesting to me because before I read that, I had been considering the idea of religion as the end game of your life, not the end. As in most games, the end game is not the end, it is an enhanced and high level version of doing whatever you were doing before, except now better and probably forever. So, with a religious aim, you are not so much trying to get somewhere as you are molding yourself to be well wherever you are and wherever you end up being. And that's not a super specific thing. So, on one hand, cult shit, magic shit is ritual meaning or being making things happen according to one's will. Ritual as instrument. You do this, you get that. Versus ritual as practice, what we were discussing. Not doing specific things to get specific things, but rather developing a mode of being suited to you and whatever your deity wants from you. And for ourselves, for now, thinking about it like that, the order is the practice and the ritual is the instrument. Building tools and the hands that use them. Now, pivoting. I don't think self improvement or building yourself up should be a goal. Instead, self discovery, figuring out what's already there, should be the goal. One goal, anyway. I was thinking people say, know your place. Well, what is your place, really? It's not what people tell you, because you can become someone who tells other people what their place is. So, your place, really, the extent of your abilities. Wherever your abilities can take you, that's your place. And to figure out your place, you have to figure out the extent of your abilities so you know where you can get and where you should get. And I like RimWorld's skills system because I think it breaks up skills in a useful way. But we're going to add here two components to it. So in the middle, you have skills, things you can learn. Now, just because you can learn them doesn't mean you're any good at them naturally, or you're going to get very far with them even if you try hard. Above the middle, you have two tiers. A little bit of a passion and a true talent, or a double passion. If you have great talent in something, if you're a genius in something, you are naturally going to be better at whatever that thing is than anybody else will be. And it won't even be close. Stephen King said he said there were 4 tiers of writers. Awful writers who will never be anything but awful writers. Genius writers who will never be anything but genius writers. Okay writers and good writers. Okay writers can become good writers. But good writers can never become genius writers because that something isn't there. In the same way, awful writers can never even become good writers because they so lack that something, they're always going to be bad at it. Then you have the passion one, or we're going to call that potential. That is a skill you have no genius in, but if you put work in, you can grow it rather well and probably better than other people will be able to. In comparison to median skills, which are you work super hard, you work for 5 years, and maybe you can get to an intermediate level. Whereas someone with talent could study for 1 year and reach where you are and beyond. It took you 5. On the opposite end, you have things you can't learn at all. Maybe they aren't weaknesses, but no matter how much work you put into them, you are seriously never going to get anywhere with them. There were a few years I was around and practicing music every day, trying to get into music, and I could barely even grasp the basics. I mean, 3 years, and I can't play Mary Had a Little Lamb. That's embarrassing. This isn't something that's going to kill me, but I will never get anywhere with it, no matter how hard I try. Can't even reach an average level. Then you have weaknesses or vulnerabilities. These are things you are so awful at. They are going to give you difficulty, not just when you encounter them, but they're probably going to find ways to rear their ugly heads and cause you pain. These are worse than never getting any better with them. These are problems so serious you're going to have to figure out how to mitigate using other skills. Now, the reason I bring all these up is I'm of the mind self-improvement doesn't or isn't the be-all end-all. A person whose vulnerability is managing money is never going to become a money mogul. And I'm not saying there are no things you can learn or improve. There are. But What's more important is figuring out your fertile or infertile soil. It's like Space Jam, or I think it's Space Jam. I haven't seen it in a long time. If you are a born basketball player, you were put on this earth to play basketball. Are you serving your god to the full extent of your ability by becoming a painter? Something you are not good at. You've been practicing for 7 years, you can't paint a stick figure. Self discovery is the more important goal. Feeling yourself out, figuring out what you can and can't do, then deciding what you should do. And in that same line, self discovery and testing the limits of your powers is a constant, ever evolving journey. Meaning, we need rituals that will help your practice. Specific actions that will help you learn your abilities and help you learn how you want to live. I had to step away from my editing software for a few hours and lost my train of thought completely. But fortunately, after getting back on a train of thought and getting a rhythm again, the software crashed. And isn't that just convenient? But that's okay, because what we're doing here is throwing ideas around. For the guy asking about the pilgrim poetry I mentioned, it's probably not pilgrim poetry. Surprisingly, shockingly, maybe not completely shockingly, but I'm pleasantly surprised and happy and warm and fuzzy inside that Professor actually responded to me. What it probably was, who it probably was Anne Bradstreet. He said it might be her "To My Dear and Loving Husband" poem, a poem to her grandson Simon, one who died, and her prologue poem. He says he's not sure it fits the bill of what I was describing, but it's close, and if you get on that train of study, Puritan study, you'll get where we're going. And then he answered a second, more magical question, religious question, we'll get back to. So regarding foundational statements like the one we discussed earlier, and that was the other connection actually, goals versus direction, or thesis statements, magic or ritual as instrument and ritual as practice. What are this thing's thesis statements, mission statements, guiding statements? What are the realities we're speaking into existence? Act without malice is in there. Another is, or might be, act without malice right now and be righteous or live righteously is the other. Those two are the big ones. But other sentiments I need to figure out how to word into thesis statements, reference statements. One is awakening to and then fulfilling your purpose. Another is expanding your consciousness, making yourself a better receiver for signals transmitting at a higher level. I don't think you're as likely to get the message or get struck with spiritual lightning if you are closed off mentally. And that's another thing you can't just do. You can't even reach a point of success, ultimate success, doing that. It's a lifelong process of expanding and staying open. You are always going to be limiting yourself. But if you can endeavor to knock some walls down and reach new areas, even if walls rise behind you, at least you are getting more, even if you can't get it all at once. For me, another one is, I think, trying to become a loving father. I've noticed I gravitate toward Vietnam-era artsmen, which is another weird thing. I don't hold disdain for current contemporary soldiers if they're doing it or they did it for financial reasons. It's a smart financial choice if you play your cards right. And it also gives you some extra cards to play in the future, outside money. But aside from them, and they seem to be rather few, I don't have a lot of love for them. Remember, the hyper patriots are the ones who are one day going to kill you or your descendants without questioning anything. Don't have a lot of love for them. Now, with Vietnam vets or Vietnam people in general, maybe it's just chance on my part, but most of them I run into seem to be extremely suspicious and critical of authority and dogma, even the ones who served their entire lives. Now, I bring this up because, again, these are the sorts of people, maybe by chance, probably not, I end up gravitating toward for mentorship. My old Vietnam mentor we'll call Jay, and although I have a few mid-level mentors of that era and sort, the primary one now we'll call L. And I'm learning different disciplines from both, but both have a few things in common. One of the main ones outside structured disciplines is, or are, love mixed with firmness. This sort of person I gravitate toward knows how to be loving, empathetic, understanding of and supporting of people, maybe even beyond what they should be. Certainly beyond what most people, especially people who market themselves as empaths, are capable of. But they also know how and when to be firm. And it's such a confusing contradiction to me. How do you maintain this level of accommodation, empathy, understanding, without becoming a doormat? As in, I can't mimic that level of empathy and accommodation, and in most situations I am a doormat. I don't know how they're doing both at such high levels. And that's not something you can teach with steps. It seems to be something you develop or you don't. And the pursuit of that is one of the things I'd like to incorporate or focus on, word better, in a way that there's a Hemingway, getting the words right. There are things you can feel, see as clear as day, but cannot word. Your objective in your studies, your practices, your rituals is to notice and then articulate those unwordable messages, put them into words, getting the words right. You do that through study, you do that through disciplines, not discipline as in stand up straight for 3 hours, but a skill set, a discipline, and a fair amount of intuition. Now, another point I'm working on. Presentation. If you like my content, look up Don Jolly. I'm sticking my neck out. Hopefully I don't hate myself for it later. Right now and for the last little while, one of my favorite YouTubers. Now, he talked about witchcraft and Wiccan conventions and degrees offered by universities. He said academic witchcraft loses something when you are learning this occult pagan shit at a desk under halogen lights. And you might say that's just feelings, but I would disagree, because presentation is part of the substance. It's not just receiving something, it is how it's received. Of spiritual practices, religions, Alan Watts said the message across multiple religions may be the exact same, but your means of getting there is everything. For instance, marriage proposal. A proposal at a fancy dinner is one presentation. Proposal in the rain, another presentation. Careless, casual proposal, another presentation. Each different presentation, even the casual one, is extraordinarily important. The presentation decides how the gift or the message is received even more than the message itself does. Meaning, when you are trying to organize an organic body, even the little goofy shit, what matters, what you think matters, what doesn't matter, what you do, how often you do it, where you do it, that's all important, even if it doesn't seem important. Meaning, you have to get the words right here, too. And I've also been watching documentaries and beginning to read about different societies. I'm thinking, right now, the Solar Order of Awakening. I was thinking, for a little while, the Solar Order of Destruction and Awakening, for soda instead of but so is funnier, and destruction isn't exactly the goal. Awakening is a much better word. And as for solar, that might make you think of sun, and it should, but the sun is just one star, and the further you get away from it, the less special it seems. The less bright it is. And I don't know why that's important, but I think it is. Now, back to the second question I asked that professor. The words or the phrase, "make your altars from unhewn stone," came to mind. And I'm wording it wrong. I'll look it up properly soon. But the idea here, Puritan idea, is you should not be worshipping in a man-made, handcrafted, hyper-organized environment, even though Puritans are what they are. Worship should happen in nature, on altars of unhewn stone. The point here being either the Puritans, or maybe this was a sect of Puritans, I don't remember, they are defining their worship in part with roughness, a lack of human organization, industry. It's presentation, and I've been thinking a lot about presentation. Would people studying in this thing gather? If they gathered, where would they gather, and why would they gather there? What would they do upon gathering? I'm digging the unhewn stone thing. That's been in my mind, or in the back of my mind, for 4 or 5 years, waiting for this appropriate moment to reemerge. If people are to gather, it should be in a place of unhewn stone vibes, Agalloch vibes, Leshen vibes, even though we aren't doing nature shit, at least not necessarily. In my mind, the way this organic thing is forming is less of a spiritual endpoint and more of a spiritual rest area. The goal isn't to push people into one specific thing using funneling rituals. The idea is more to provide people a mental and physical place and a little bit of structure and some tools to use to get them better in touch with their God, with their purpose, with whatever is out there they feel they feel they need to find but are having trouble, and help them along in that direction. The trouble, or one of the troubles, is organizations fail. But if the emphasis is put more on a set of beliefs and practices than it is on the organization believing and practicing them, then the order serves the purpose it was intended for better than the practicing order itself would. And that's probably the best idea, because I realize I'm building this more for myself than I am for anybody else. I was out of touch with my intuition and my spirituality for quite some time. But I've started doing things to get myself back into that state of mind and get my intuition firing again. And while nothing especially, I don't know what you would put it, how you would put it. While I haven't been visited by anything lately, I feel I'm back on the path. My eyes are opening again. And that was something I accomplished with ritual. Meaning, yes, ritual can affect your state of mind in a, again, maybe not empirically measurable, but felt measurable, observable measurable way. Meaning, putting together a set of somewhat proven rituals would be useful. As in, part of how I got back here, or am getting back to where I used to be, and it's difficult when you aren't indulging in brain-rotting substances every day, which I say with affection. I've gone back to mildly starving myself and taking way, way, way too much caffeine. Reaching a state you feel so weak and are so weak and tweaked out, you sense you aren't going to be alive much longer. Even if that isn't the case, that feeling expands your mind a bit more. Or mine, anyway. I've been doing a bunch of stupid shit trying to figure out how to work this. Everything else I can think of for right now hasn't synthesized or crystallized into anything approaching proper ideas yet. So we'll cut it off here. Basic point, basic summary. You aren't trying to build something. You don't need to build anything. What you need to do is awaken yourself to yourself, figure out what you can do and always could do, and then do what you were born to do. But that about rippity wraps this one up. I hope you enjoyed watching, because I certainly enjoyed making it. I hope ritual and practice become something. Like if you enjoyed, because it helps me out a lot. Subscribe if you haven't, because we do this shit sometimes, and comment your thoughts, because I love hearing from you. What do you think about anything like this? I'm curious. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Really, we have a lot of fun on this channel. So much fun, in fact, you can throw it over your shoulder and stay warm. That's how much we have on this channel, and I look forward to doing this with you guys again in the future.